plays out. We do have Freddie with us now, so we can move from one giant fire in the middle of a town square to several others. Because who doesn't love that. But first time on the show, very stoked to have this gentleman with us, Freddie Ponton. How you doing, man? How you doing,
Freddie?
Oh, and you're muted. You're muted
at the very bottom.
Yeah, little microphone thingy. I don't know, maybe he's on a phone. I'm not sure.
Well, it's nice to have him here to get some perspective on what's going on. It's so hard to get that, across country, the foreign policy, the media apparatus. Like, it's just impossible to get it. You got it. Hey, Freddie.
I'm good. Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm not used with this application, but anyway, thank you very much for having me on the show, guy.
Welcome.
Absolutely good to have you here. So I was listening to, I think, the most recent interview that you did with Patrick, and we've been trying to, I guess all we've seen is what we've seen on Twitter, because it's not like there's news coverage of what's going on in France, and you guys are pretty slim on translating your good media because of your language arrogance. So getting an English version of what's going on is a little rough. As you see it, from what you understand, as Ryan was saying, it looks like it's about more than pension reform. We're 4 or 5 years into yellow vest protests that did get interrupted during COVID, but it's not like the sentiment went away. What's going on?
Absolutely. I think you really put the finger on the problem. That it's absolutely just not related to the pension reforms. What we're looking at here is the question actually that has been posed in France is: are we looking at a revolt or are we looking at a revolution? And these are two different things. So, as you just said, the Yellow Vest movement was 100% a revolt, where the signals are there. The population is clearly opposed to a certain amount of policies that has been propagated by our governments, especially since the Macron's administration. So we are on the receiving end of these policies, and it's hurting. And the classes that are hurting the most are obviously the lower income classes. And but we're seeing now the small entrepreneurs, medium classes as well, starting to hurt as well, because the inflation, because the prices, because the globalizations, all in all, and then the pandemic on top of that. So if for those that believe in it, then of course that's interesting to look at the overall frustrations and the accumulations of these frustrations over the years. And I think what we are saying today is this new generations on the streets, these workers are saying we've had enough. So pension reform is only a pretext, but I think the doleance and the grievance are far much larger and wider than the media want to say.
That's really interesting. If I could jump in, Steve, I think what is, in my opinion, the most obvious, the reason this is becoming different than maybe we've seen in the past, and I think this has been building a long time, is the class difference, right? Like, for a long time, you could point that, even middle class can say, oh, well, poor people are struggling, but, they're poor, and that, the whole discussion can be that it's their fault or they didn't do X, Y, and Z. But now that this is becoming basically everybody but the elitist class, the middle class is affected by all this too. And this is not just France. We're talking all around the world, the United States and so on, that suddenly people are realizing this isn't just, oh, the poor people are struggling. This is, something bigger is happening. And I think that they're losing control of the narrative in that way. And that's why they got to couch it on something like a policy change. And really, I mean, and then on top of that, Freddie, do you think that's accurate? And do you think this also has an overlap with the authoritarian steps being taken during COVID and, that kind of pushback to just the general policy changes?
Well, absolutely. I think you really have, it's very hard to dissociate everything we've been saying since the early part of the pandemic, So it's really all fold into the same box, if you will. And for journalists that are obviously interesting in geopolitics and economics, we obviously look at it. We have to zoom out. You never look and take an event on face value. You first, to understand it, you zoom out, and you're trying to understand exactly what you're looking at. And to do that, you have to go back to the policies back in the 70s, 74, after the oil crisis in the United States, because this is when the big decisions were made. So for those that are interested, not all journalists are interested in that, but for those that are, then this is where you need to go back. You need to go back to 1980 and the Council on Foreign Relations with their 1980 project, which was, well discussed and well unfolded by LaRouche. So when you look at that, you're starting to understand really where all that is coming from. So you look at the Bucharest Treaty, you look at the United Nations conventions, and then looking at what the big decisions were alongside and what the policies and who promoted these policies, and you really start to understand it. And I'm obviously speaking from a European and a French point of view, that we are really under the attack of this policy that was made a very, very long time ago. So these decisions are starting to bear fruits, very young fruits. And everything we're seeing, from what's happening on the street of Paris or in the battlefield in Solin, it's exactly the same. The origins of this crisis are exactly the same. And that is the concentrations of power in the hands of very few. And then the second part of it, of course, being the disintegration of the European economy, whether it's the industrial aspect, the agriculture, the financing, and so on and so forth. So it's really unfolding. We are living a very interesting time, Ryan.
So you see this as a global thing, that France is obviously a central point right now, but this is a global attack, essentially. I would agree with that, if that's what you're saying.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. It's just that they had to start somewhere. And if you read the 1980 project from the CFR, you will understand that Germany is really the country to downgrade, literally, from an economic point of view, from an energy point of view, from every aspect. Enemy is the biggest enemy of the United States. So US wants to really downgrade Germany. And if Germany falls, then all rest collapse. And that's what we're saying now. And of course, we have to study one event after the other. We cannot talk about the pandemic like we will talk about the agricultural issues and water retention issues. Everybody has their own specificity and their own agenda and their own blueprints. And we found the blueprints. We have the blueprints of what we're saying now. So nothing has been hidden from us, Ryan.
Wow.
I mean, to that point, the destabilization of Germany and downgrading its economic status has been openly discussed by U.S. foreign policy wonks and people within high place to play in the State Department and a part of the diplomatic corps for, decades. John Bolton, in his book, openly talks about how the second biggest threat to America, in his opinion, or in the mind of the administration and the national security team while he was, advising Trump and all that shit, was an economic partnership between Germany and Russia and a strong EU. That's viewed as the second largest global threat to American hegemony.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's well described, for geopoliticians, and especially US policymakers and British policymakers. They will always refer back to the work of Nicholas Pipeman, so Halford Mackinder's. They look at Eurasia as a central point. You cannot allow Russia to come close to Germany. This is a forbidden relationships, and everything you're saying is based on that. As far as the Ukraine conflict concerned, the globalization, the war on China, the war on Russia, the South and North kind of hemisphere battle, for as far as population, as far as the Malthusian kind of a philosophy where you're wondering whether you're going to be able and there's going to be enough food for everyone on the planet. So all this is really well structures, and there is an architecture. There are blueprints behind these programs. One Health being a major program which has been pushed by the government, by the World Bank, and eventually by the World Health Organization. It took took a while, but these are very, very important blueprints that people need to familiarize themselves. I've written extensively on One Health because it's really the centerpiece where all the policy making is made around it that justify the emergency measures. Emergency measures originate basically back to the Nixon era, with the Houston plan, and which is kind of a CIA outfit in the White House, So this is when this whole thing started, and we can clearly see now how One Health was used by the WHO, the Global Bank, and all the United Nations as a way to gather data to justify emergency measures. And emergency measures themselves, they are basically coming out of the continuity of government policies that has been pushed by the Nixon era all the way down to 9/11. So it's pretty simple. It's not that complex to understand what's going on.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. The continuity of government plan is as I perceive that, the way that I see it going forward is essentially, I feel like that's what you're saying, is the moment where this kind of break or shift or creation of this like parallel government was created that never really went away, right? Like where essentially the argument was, oh, it's just plans just in case, and that it was theorized. But then the argument going is that it was essentially something that just forever, like, do you see that as being essentially like the intelligence apparatus? Or is that something different? Like, how do you perceive that? And is that what ultimately what you're saying, that that's like a separate controlling faction?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, Peter Del Scott will tell you probably more than I do about that, but for sure, this is clearly a huge presence, a huge push from the intelligence community, what people have come to call the deep state, but deep state doesn't really mean anything. What's the deep state? Is deep water, deep horizon, whatever. Deep state doesn't mean anything. What it means is you got to put it in word for people to understand. This is basically a public-private partnership. That's what it is. And the deep state is basically a bunch of neocons that work alongside the intelligence community to promote a global agenda by destroying the Middle East and then attacking after and at the latest the Russia and eventually China. So there's a plan, a global plan that has been orchestrated behind the scene that people have called the deep state, but it's just the intelligence community with the private sectors and the Department of Defense, with Homeland Security on certain occasions, working with different agencies. It's a cross-agency plan where they have placed these technocrats directly sent from the trilateral, because the trilateral is almost the HR department for the CFR. This is where they send their people into a key position within the American governments, and they orchestrate basically what has been cooked up at the CFR. And it is really intelligence based. That goes all the way. Whether you talk about the pandemic, whether you talk about the Ukraine war, whether you talk about any of these war, Libya, Yemen, I mean, it's intelligence community. This is CIA and others. There's less known agencies that are behind it as well.
There seems to be, let's see, I don't know, just you're talking about how it's really not that difficult when you take a look at it. It hasn't been obfuscated at all, really. But there's such a disconnect because all of this has been viewed as a journalistic third rail. It's been viewed as tinfoil hattery, and there's literally zero evidence to support that it's a conspiracy. So it's in stripping away the kind of I don't know, more esoteric elements from it, or the things that drive people away from it. What we really have is a well-formed, well-funded group of specific individuals that is operating under a very specific set of technocratic plans because they view society as something that you can just kind of plug and play different parts in, and that individual people don't fucking matter. It's not that hard to figure out. They tell you all the time.
Exactly. I mean, you said it really beautifully. Is that look, we've been living with this fiat currency for way too long. This is a sick horse. Everybody knew that. If you speak to any financiers, they'll tell you it is a sick horse. But they're gonna ride that horse until he dies, until the finish line, and we are at the finish line. So obviously they're not going to wait the last minute to come up with a plan that's going to work for them. I mean, they're not going to surrender their power. They have everything in their hand. Why would they do that? They run the media, they run they bankroll the money, the fake money. It doesn't matter. They have their hand on in many pies, even the dirty money and the corruptions and so on, and money laundering. So this is really today what we are looking at is the plan that is to replace the old model. And if you really look into Rockefeller's foundation talks really well about it. If you read their literatures, they tell you there is a big system and there are many systems, and our job is to replace these systems. So financial system, food systems, health systems, and so on. So when that is clear that this is what they're doing, you just have to kind of put the puzzle together as to who's behind it, and clearly we've been dealing with puppets. We have not actually seen the real crime perpetrators. Perhaps, Bill Gates is probably as close as you're going to get from someone, as a global criminal, but Bill Gates does not exist without an agenda, without an infrastructure. He only has the money. He's not a scientist. He's not allowed to talk about science. What does he know? But clearly, he's been at the forefront of that because he's bankrolling a lot of these projects, and he's controlling media, he's controlling academics. Very important to control the academics and these institutions. So he has a job. He does his job, but he's not a main guy. These are big guys, which names you never heard. You never actually get to hear on media, even independent media. And then what we serve with is what I call the Robert Malone of the world. They come up to tell you that, this is terrible, that government is trying to, lie to us and everything. But these are the very same people that are pretending to be on our side that are lying to us. And again, those that have done the research, they know exactly who does what. There's no secret. Because you can really trace back the events, and I've seen since the pandemic, since the kind of the revert of the story of the pandemic, when people are starting to talk about gain of function, and people are starting to talk about the virus leak lab story, all this nonsense. These are distractions that are entertained by people that have obviously hands in the pie. They have money involved. They have interest at stake. So we look into that. We know who's true, who's not. And funny enough, these people, we never heard from them at the beginning. They only appeared by the end of 2021, mid-2022. They just arrived late. And now they say, hey, I'm with you guys. This is horrible what happened, So, yeah, we got to be careful about who we're following, what is true, what is not. And then, trying to help people to train people in the fifth generation warfare, because that's what it is. That's what we're in, fifth generation warfare.
I wholeheartedly agree. I actually would like to hear more of your thoughts on, the extent to which this is an illusion, like the whole thing. But before we get to that, I wanted you to bring it back for people listening to France and how what we're talking about on a broad scale connects with what's currently happening in France. Like for the average person, because I know that Steve and I are right there with you, right? Like this is
sure, you guys
clear. But the average person might be a little bit lost on why the protests in France connect to the bigger picture. If you could connect that for people, I think that's important.
Of course. So what we're looking at here, as you said earlier, I was mentioning about continuity of government and ruling under emergency measures. So when you start to use that as a rule of thumb, if you will, to rule, it doesn't really matter what the people agree. You don't have to be the most popular politicians to rule your country. All you need is enough votes to be elected. And then, the technology will do the rest, to get you where you need to be. So what's happening is that when you're losing that majority within your national assembly, like the parliament in France, and you have a budget that you need to approve, which is obviously not a very popular budget because it addresses a lot of issues that are unpopular, and most of the time that does not have the support from the French citizenry. So what's happening is you have recourse to an article that is part of the the fifth sections of the 1958 Constitution, the French Constitution, which say that basically you can bypass the parliaments by using an article known as the 1493 article, amongst other articles, of course. And this article basically allows the government in place to push through any kind of bills without the will of the people. That is the reason why we are having people on the streets for quite some time now, over 2 weeks, is people have warned the government, have warned the French government, because this budget has been in the making since summer 2022, with Elisabeth Borne, the Prime Minister of France. She was brought in to have this bill passed, and more importantly, to get the pension reform passed. She's got a hand in the pie, probably, So what we know is that it can be constitutional. It doesn't make it democratic. And that's a very important notion, because when you rule under emergency rules, right, you have only one kind of a field of sight, if you will. You see it your way. And that's what Macron and his administrations are saying. They have an agenda. They're unfolding this agenda. And it's very much linked to the European Union and BlackRock agenda. So European Union is pretty much in charge of this guideline. They want to centralize these pensions everywhere, all across Europe, and they want to put it under, corporate investment fund management. So because of that, obviously the big BlackRock and Vanguard of the world, that's just all over these countries, in Spain, in Portugal, in Italy, looking to get access. In France, we got 600 billion. I know BlackRock is in trillions, doesn't matter, but 600 billion is a sweet little pie, to get your hand on. And that's exactly what's happening. But if you ask the French people, they'll tell you, no, we're just fine. We don't need you. And that Macron couldn't have it. And so they had to force themselves, and they forced these emergency measures onto the people. So if you put on the back of, obviously, a pandemic, billions we're sending to Ukraine's weapon, with depleted uraniums, people are starting really to get really frustrated. And that's where we are now. That's why we have millions of people on the street. And today, watch today, it's going to be big as well. It's starting now. So that started, actually.
Go ahead.
I was seeing right before we went on, there were people predicting that today was going to be 2 to 3 times larger than yesterday or the day prior, and this is really starting to pick up momentum. At the same time, there's people who are trying to put forth the idea that the entirety of the French protests are staged events, and that you can't get media access into any of the areas where there's fires and this and that. Have you seen anything? Have you heard of anything where there's been deliberately staged incidents going on? Or from the best of your ability, how organic are these events?
That's a good question.
That's a good question. It's a fair question. Although I never disregard, any source, any information. You have to look at it, and but dedicate enough time to be able to state upon it. And I have not dedicated enough time on looking into that. Stage actors, there are companies. We saw it in the UK. We saw it during the 9/11. We saw it in the UK during the bombing in the UK. A lot of stage actors. We cannot deny this exists. That is 100%, because I remember doing the homework back in the days when there was the UK bombing. So I was in London myself at the time. I was literally around the corner where it happened. So I was slightly interested. So yes, it does exist. Whether French is staged or not, I do speak with people that are actually on the ground. So I can tell you what you're saying. In my videos, at least, I can tell you this is straight from the ground. That it's not staged at all. What is a stage, and that is probably less spoken of, is the presence of these police law enforcement units that have integrated and that disguise themselves as black blocs, what we call black blocs. This so-called extra mega left radicalized. But what we're saying is you cannot actually differentiate a law enforcement officer that has got a mask, that's got a hood on, and that's going to be basically creating mayhem within the procession. So when you see that, you're like, hang on a second, we've been told the black bloc, these left-wingers, radicalized, violence, But then what we're saying, and we're starting to identify, because we also have access to intelligence, and we also have people within the government that talks to us. So we have information, and we can see them now. We even have footage of them integrating the processions and in creating mayhem. So again, I'm watching more that than the actors, the stage, maybe a couple of fires. It's easy to stage. You light up a couple of bins and you can put that on make a nice photo shoot. But all in all, I think we cannot discredit this movement and as being a hoax. It just wouldn't be fair, and it's just not there.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, I think that's always an important question to ask, though. I think it's always a good question. And what you're saying, though, is important, because this is interestingly enough something that people dispute, which I don't even know. There's public discussions about how they infiltrate and blah, blah, blah with their informants and act, and either way, like January 6th is a great example where you can see that now more and more keeps coming out, how it's obvious that they had individuals there on the ground. And now we have evidence of those same people being ones that initiate violence and so on. And so I think that's always a factor, but that doesn't mean people should dismiss that there are actually people out there. Like, even entirely manipulated events from the ground up still end up having people that think that they're a part of something that's real. There's always that level of it. So it's always a great question. But yeah, I think this is stemming from a lot longer, as I think we're talking about Yellow Vests and so on. My opinion, Yellow Vests is probably one of the most organic, legitimate movements I've seen in my lifetime. It's very almost leaderless to a degree. Like, people tried to become leaders or take over. I remember seeing like the QAnon movement, like, try to co-opt it, and they're like, get out of here. We saw like the red vest come out of nowhere. Like, it's so clear they tried. But so I think that's probably the foundation for all of this. They just pretended like Yellow Vests went away, So I'm happy to see this, because people need to be paying attention to what they're doing. And I hope I don't want to see violence, or I don't want to see injury, but this kind of thing needs to happen in the sense of drawing attention to the problem. And it's not just about a policy change. It's about a worldwide shift of power, and this democracy illusion that again, whether we should even want that, is the rug is being pulled out right now. And I think for another reason. Go ahead.
Absolutely, Ryan. Well, what I think also we are seeing at the moment is the cross sections of the unions, which are pretty much the organizers of these strikes and this protest in Paris and across the nation. And what's very interesting is that we can see them learning from the Yellow Vest movement, because the Yellow Vest movements really died out of basically being infiltrated by too much violence and too much, left wingers coming out, nothing to do with the organic, as you mentioned, nature of this movement. And they literally, with the police together, managed to basically make this movement violent, where the Yellow Vest people are absolutely not violent, and they're very peaceful people. I met many, they are absolutely the day-to-day Joe. They just want to work, pay their tax, enjoy their family, go to retirement, and not being messed around with. That's all it is. These are normal people, right? So to transform a legitimate movement into a violent movement is what government does, right? That they are the only people that do that. And we are seeing it exactly today. The problem is that they cannot now say, oh, we have the Yellow Vests, that there are no legitimacy. Yellow Vests were basically considered as an organic movement, but they had no legitimacy. That's how the government was trying to portray them. But now you're talking about the most powerful unions across the countries organizing, having 3.5 million people on the street last Thursday in France. That's not a small number in France. This is the largest movement and gathering of people since the 50s, So we really have a problem here. We can't just look away. We have a problem, and it's not going away, this one. This one is not going away, because they won't be able to play the card and say, this movement has no legitimacy. It has. This is driven by the unions.
Yeah,
and it really does incorporate. It really does incorporate the entirety of the country, because along with Dutch farmers, French farmers have been under considerable pressure and legislative attacks. Same way all throughout Europe. They're doing the exact same thing here in the States. There's a coordinated effort on the part of not just the French government, but specifically in this case, the French government, of using state authority or executive authority to completely circumvent not just the will of the people, but the way that their own government, by their own marketing, is supposed to work.
Right.
They've completely denigrated 100% of their talking points based solely on just a handful of their actions. And I don't know what legitimacy they can claim or expect to maintain going forward. I mean, they only survive no confidence votes because of significant arm twisting.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go on, Ryan, please.
I'll just a quick point. Just going to say, I think that's suggestive of something bigger. I mean, why would they expose themselves to such a degree? You know, I'm with you. It's like all of a sudden they've just pulled the mask off. Like even from the media perspective, we're talking about this. It's like, you know, one government source says, and that's their story. Like, at what point did they shift away from even pretending to care that there is journalistic integrity? You know, it's like we've seen this everywhere, and so it's really concerning to me. And to add to your point, Steve, we saw the Dutch farmers, we saw the trucker protests. Like these are all organic, independent, like average people movements that are being framed as some kind of like terrorist movement. They're desperate, in my opinion. I think that's
yes. You know, I mean, you guys in Canada has been you saw that, you know, with the truckers movement. I mean, this is really counterintelligence 101. You know, I mean, this is what these guys do. You know, they really master the arts of, you know, controlling the narrative and setting the scene for the narrative. So they're setting the set for the narrative and then they control the narrative. I mean, it's quite easy job. I mean, come on, this is not rocket science when you have all the legacy medias working for you or with you or both. Then it's easy, you know, to control pretty much. You know, Macron's, if you look at his camp and his voters, what you can see is they're mainly people retired or people that are, you know, very comfortable in life, you know. So either way, there's enough people that are interesting in rocking the boat. Those that are retired are half active in the economy of the countries. And the other ones are doing so well with Macron financially that they're certainly not going to go against that narrative. So it usually leaves 75% of France that has to live with a tyrant. And it doesn't have to be legitimate. It doesn't have to tell you lies. He can tell you straight away, you know, I run the show, and you get along with the program because I run the show and you don't. And this is what probably is the most shocking for people, is to have your government, your media is telling you this is how it goes, and we are serving you a lie. We know it's a lie. It doesn't matter, you know. It's okay, you know. You get along with it, you know, because that's the new normal. You know, that's what it is. I saw it coming 20 years ago, and people are awakening to it. Some of them, like you guys, have been awakened for far longer, and you know exactly what you're looking at. You can recognize the beast, and then now we need just to convince enough people to actually look into the truth, you know, and stay away from television because. There's no hope.
And just kind of to underscore all the points you've been making, Freddie, that James Melville had put this compilation together earlier this morning, and this is just, I mean, snapshots of events all throughout the planet that, I mean, people are understanding what's going on and what's being done. They may not be able to contextualize it in a way that is universally acceptable. They may all have very different points of view of where they're coming from, but everyone has seen rampant abuses by frankly illegitimate governments that are no longer tenable for their ability to get through their day-to-day. A line was drawn and they were like, no, this is enough. Where the West is concerned, or at least where Canada and the US are concerned, everyone has been so intentionally disconnected for so long that unless you've got, I don't know, like a music festival or a football game, you're not getting people with disparate ideologies in the same room at the same time. And I think we've really got to figure out a way to make that happen before any of this shit goes down. Because for the last almost 10 years or more, since Occupy, there's been a concerted effort to make for goddamn sure that if you have even the slightest ideological or political difference with someone, you have to cut them immediately out of your life. They have to be anathema, and everyone that they've ever associated with is also inherently guilty.
Let me ask you both. Oh, go ahead, Freddie.
Yeah, it's a very good point you're making. It's the it is that kind of a crevasse, this real deep that is basically getting bigger and bigger, and that is the distanciation between the government and the people. The dialogue is not there. The social contract with the government has been severed, and I think what we are saying now is that people are trying to organize themselves, and it is really hard because these guys are 30, 40 years ahead of us, so we need to catch up, and a lot of catching up to do. Now, we don't need to convince everyone of that. We don't need to convince the entire population. First of all, it's impossible to do that, but number two is that we just need a small percentage. If we get just 20% of the population in Canada, in France, in the United States, and so on and so forth, absolutely on the same page with the essential, with the fundamentals, as far as, understanding exactly what's going on and taking steps to remove it and show some leadership, because it's all about leadership. The reason what's happening today is that we have not had the time to have our own leaders. They have their own leaders at the World Economic Forums, big corporations, and talk about the deep state guys, But what about us? Do we have leadership? Do we have actually the real leaders that we deserve? And can we have these guys? Can we trust them to take us to victory? And how that's going to happen? What does it look like? So that's where we are now. So we are looking for ourselves. We are looking on the streets of Paris or Israel or in other countries. We are looking for ourselves. We're looking for leaderships. We are looking for something that makes sense, that makes us feel safe, and more importantly, that give us a path, some kind of direction as to how we can counteract this enormous move from the deep states against their own population. So that's where we are now, and it's a very interesting time. But I'm very confident we will succeed. It's not looking bad at all.
Right, exactly. So let me ask you both a question. And this is something I often lean into, just because I think, one, I do believe that we're here, but I've also been asking this for a long time, because I think we always need to ask ourselves this question because of how aggressively controlled the corporate media is, and our only real perception of any majority comes from the corporate media, right? So the video you just played, that has 4.5 million views, if I saw that correctly, right? So I think the question really is, do you think we've already reached a point where we have enough people that are aware? And that's why we're seeing a lot of this happen. And it's like we're almost in a moment where we're going like, we need to get there. So we're in this hamster wheel of like going, we need to get to a point we've reached a long time ago, and because we only see the corporate media that goes, no, you're a fringe, you're a weirdo, you're an anti-vaxxer, you're a conspiracy theorist. And too much of that actual majority still believe that they're the minority. You get what I'm saying?
How many times now, Ryan, have you heard me say we've already done all the stuff that we need to do? We just have to remember that we've done it, and we need to get on the same, we need to like get together to remember. I mean, I really, really do believe that. I truly believe that all of the tools that we need are available to us. There are enough competent people with, if they have an agenda, it's to make sure that we have more autonomy, we have more liberty. That's the agenda. It is an increase in individual liberty, and there's the intellectual capability, there's the physical capability. Everything that we need is here, and everything that we need to do has already been done successfully. We just have to fucking realize it, I guess. I don't know. Gerald Splenty was saying, where there's enough of us already, let's all let's all get together to figure out who's best suited to handle which tasks and move forward, because we can't worry or be bothered about the people who are never going to come around, and the people that are on the fence have to be shown an alternative that's successful, a viable thing, before they'll hem or haw the other way. because it's so much more easy to stay within the confines of the status quo, regardless of how difficult it is, until you hit that line where now we're seeing all over the people have found it.
Yes, look, what's something very interesting that I've noticed over the past 3 years is that the major weapon that has been unleashed on us is confusion. And confusion is a very important and very dangerous tool because it can destroy everything. If people don't trust what they believe in, how they're gonna, make their mind about things, or what they're reading, what they're listening. Like today, your audience is listening. How does they make their mind about what they're listening? So the confusion needs to be eradicated. And to eradicate it, you need to know that what we've done, and millions of people have done on social media, people, journalists, independent journalists, we've shown the truth. The truth is out there. Right? Now, people need to convince themselves, stop being confused, and convince yourself that there are people that actually care. We care. Your government doesn't care about you. They've never cared about you, and they won't care. They will never care. This is not what they do. They're here to take care of the institution. Right? They're here to protect the institutions and making sure that their son, their cousin, their family will be the next leaders of the world, not you. Their people. So they care about their own people, and they care about the preservation of the institutions. So what's left with us if we don't trust ourselves, if we not able to spot the fake within the dissidents movement, within the fake, saviors? Because there are going to be plenty of people coming and trying to tell us we're going to save us, but nobody's going to save you. You save yourself first. You make the decision when you come out of your home and you tell yourself, okay, I know what these guys are up to. And if today I can talk to one person and tell him what I think, doesn't have to agree with you. It's not but at least you get to tell, you get to get your voice out there and say, okay, I live by what I believe. We got 2 kids in France right now in the coma because they were on the battlefield on Saturday fighting with the law enforcement for what they believe. You might disagree with what they're fighting for, but they were fighting for what they believe. And that in itself is honorable. And honor is all about what we have left. Honor and confidence. And making sure that confusion is not amongst our ranks. And if we can do that, we've already won, because the lies is going to take the lift. It's already there. But the truth is going to take the stairs. But we're already in the stairs. And we've been in the stairs for like 2.5 years already with the pandemic, people looking into it, exposing, So we're already there, and we're about to reach to the top. And that's why the world is about to explode, because people now, they know, some of them have bought the lie, and some people know that they've been lied to.
I figured it out, Freddie. You helped me figure it out. We're living in a flesh representation of Donkey Kong, right? Because we're in the stairwell, we're on the stairwell, we're going up, we're making ground, but along the way, there's a giant fucking gorilla holding boulders at us and smashing shit. And sometimes it takes people out, and sometimes we get knocked back and we got to start the climb all the way over again. But that's effectively, Donkey Kong was a morality tale. That's what I've decided today.
The only difference is it's a gigantic pink Pfizer elephant at the top throwing things down. That's what's happening. But
somebody's got to animate that now. Right. That has to be a giant pink Pfizer elephant hurling boulders down the Donkey Kong rail. Yes. Fantastic.
I wanted to add one thing, though, to what you said a moment ago. Honor and confidence, right? I completely agree with you. And I think that just adding to that is integrity, right? Because obviously honor is important, confidence are important, but integrity is a little different, in my opinion. And I think that's a thing, like what we need is to not play the game along with them, right? Have honor with the way you conduct yourself, have confidence in the way you're doing it, but make sure you maintain your own integrity in the point of which, don't lie for your truth, right? Just because we know what they're doing, don't, be dishonest to try to achieve that end, even if you think it's for good reason. That's the greater good government analogy that they always push on us. I think we need to be better in everything we do, and I think that's what we're all representing here. You got
it right. You got it 100%. I cannot not add anything to that. You said it all. Integrity is everything. We don't have to challenge everybody. We challenge ourselves first with integrity. Absolutely 100%. So now I feel very comfortable. Like 3 3 years ago, when I started to look into these COVID things and this nonsense, I knew something was really wrong, and there's no way I would have get vaccinated. No, my family got vaccinated, but they don't know shit, so I was okay. And who am I to convince them? They're old and they're like, so do what you want to do if you think this is the right thing. I'm not a prophet, I'm just trying to see through the lies, but I think what's really important is that with that victory, we need to acknowledge our victories. I mean, come on, we are, in the Congress, you have, in the House of Representatives, people talking about, even if they're talking about nonsense, they're still talking about it. Normally, a crisis like the COVID would have been swept under the rug, been gone a long time ago, replaced with some other distractions. They're very good at that. But they're still, pretty much at the top of the agenda in the House of Representatives and their Intelligence Committee, so they're investigating, they're inquiring, they know something is wrong. And it's very important now for those that I think all agrees that we need to get to the bottom of this. And it's not about the origin of SARS-CoV-2. We need to get to the bottom of it. That's for the distraction. What we need to get to the bottom of is that who are the architects that authorized a military operation within the understanding of emergency use of authorization to unleash a biosynthetic weapon onto the population in the world? Now, if we can answer that question, who authorized that? Because there's absolutely 100% evidence today that what was unleashed onto the people is a security covered countermeasures. That's what has been unleashed onto the people, which means that we developed a vaccine, the Department of Defense with their partners, they developed what they call a vaccine, which is a vaccine, okay? But this vaccine is a security countermeasures because it comes with an antidote. And that's, for those that understand military operations, they will understand that when you develop this kind of countermeasures, that means that this is made for military and then eventually perhaps to civilians, but they're not safe. They're known to not be safe. They're known to be not reliable. That's why you have an antidote. So that when you send your troops onto a battleground, right, and these battlegrounds is basically being pretty much sprayed with what they call VLP, virus like particles, different organism, pathogens, viruses, bacteria, parasite, you name it. Anything you can put in there. It's all, anyway, biosynthetic. And you can win wars like this. But when you go home, you need to get the antidote and you need to go home and you make sure your soldiers have this antidote. That is a security covered countermeasures. And that is exactly what people have been injected with. I want to be very clear about that because the evidence is there. Some people are really talk well about it. Probably Karen Kingston's understand it. Sasha Latipova's really kind of done some great work with regards to the structuring, the manufacturing, which I've really looked into deeply. We were in touch a while ago with Sasha. So we talked about, and we know we're on the same path. We're going the same way. We might not agree on everything, but one thing is for sure is you can keep on looking for a virus because there's never been any virus in this lab that leak anywhere. There was no virus, nothing biologic of nature. But if you talk about synthetic biology, then you're going to start to enter a different realm. And that is the realm of biotechnology, the merger of technology and biology. And that's what we need to talk about it. That's why I'm very concerned nobody is talking about the tech, because this is a story about a tech, about a new technology, and it's about a story about transhumanism. So if we're not going to talk about that, we'll never get close to the truth.
I agree completely. I'm really interested about what you just said, actually. Really quickly, though, so in regard to the injection, I think we can all agree, at least what the evidence suggests. Now, Sasha Latipova has done great work on that. In regard to the actual discussion of whatever COVID-19 is, are you of the mind that was an illusion? Like Denny Rancourt, PhD, has kind of put up a lot of discussion about, as things we've talked about, the combination of flu and pneumonia, the PCR false positives. Do you think there was something, nothing, just out of curiosity? Because I think that's an interesting part where people would want to know in regard to the the next step of the bioweapon. And then I want to ask you about the VLP, the virus-like particles.
Yes, absolutely. So my answer to your question is there was no virus, because first of all, there's not been any isolate of this virus.
Right.
It's not me saying it, even the Chinese, we don't trust them, but the head of the CDC was trusted by the American government for many things. So why shouldn't we trust them? When he was interviewed by CBS and he was told, so what about this virus? And he clearly said it. He said, the problem is we've never isolated this virus.
Exactly.
That's the end of the story. Now, we've never isolated any viruses at all. I'm part of these guys that I'm ready to put my name on it, that this virus story is completely the inventions of the pharmaceutical industrial complex, and they've basically thrive on this story of viruses. I think we need to go back to the laboratory. We need to go back to the fundamentals of science and physics and biology and really look back into what it is that we're actually calling virus. But in this case of COVID-19, there's no need to talk about virus, because there's no virus as such, because we have the sequence. We know where this virus was studied. We know that was at the P4 lab. We know the sp2 prolines. We know exactly what the spike protein looks like. It has been patented back, with SARS-CoV, and we know that NIH already has invested a lot of money with Barrick into that and into the research with Moderna. We know that the virus was already, the so-called virus, the sequence was circulating already in March 2019. So it cannot be a virus, because from the point that one thing is wrong, one thing is false, the whole story is false. So we're told that this virus was just basically coming out in late December 2019, early January, and it became a pandemic. But now we know 3 years down the line that this thing was circulating already in March 2019, and that is scientifically absolutely undeniable. So when we know that, that's mean the story is false, that you cannot talk about virus anymore, but what we can talk about is what we know. And what we know is that what has been basically unveiled by the scientific community, the independent scientific community that has looked into the vaccines, that have looked into how these vaccines were manufactured, like Sasha Latypova did, and like Karen Kingston looking into the patents and trying to understand what is the tech. Mm-hmm. When you get all that together and you're starting to get a bigger pictures and understanding that, this technology under the cover of research for cancer was really to bring about a new platform. It's not about the vax. It's not about the mRNA. It's about the platform.
Right.
Well,
they get the platform agreed and assessed and basically vetted by the WHO. And that's it. That's all you need. Moderna and Pfizer have achieved that. Now they have a safe and effective platform. They can go with any product, any mRNA, any solution through these platforms, unchallenged, exclusivity. That's what they achieved.
Was it the Milken Institute where Fauci was saying exactly this in 2018, 2019, where he was talking about the definite desire, if not the overwhelming agenda, to change the vaccine platform from traditional, was the egg-based vaccinations to this new technology, and then magically...
Wasn't it Bright that was with him there too, Rick Bright? I think they were suggesting like they needed some kind of action. The same thing they did with 9/11. We need a catalyzing event to shift
perhaps
things what we
some
want.
sort of major event in order to bring in the new technology. Can't put my finger on it. Perhaps a lab leak. Maybe a pangolin has a special hug with a bat or a turtle. Somewhere there's a raccoon dog involved. Yeah.
The whole thing is a real shot. You see, the way I look at it, I mean, I'm always trying to bring different dimension to my reflection. My reflection of it is that there's a large amount of money, really a huge stew of money for the biodefense industry that has been put on the NIH and Anthony Fauci responsibility. So this guy is really running billions and billions of dollars, and everybody wants a pie of that. But you need to extract that money from the government. This is taxpayers' money. So this is another way, again, to launder money. Taxpayers' money. You can send it to Ukraine, and get it back in Bitcoin, maybe, or you can basically create a fake virus, a fake story of a virus. You're going to have to spend billions developing a technology that you already have in the cooker for the past at least 4 years. And also, you can spend billions on basically sponsoring surveillance work, not conservatory work, surveillance works all across Southeast Asia, and Africa. So that now you get it. That's stew of money. It needs to be spent. Rule number one in government: spend all your budget. Otherwise, you're going to get less the next year. So that's what they've done. They've wanted to spend all that money, and then they develop a major manufacturing capacity in the United States for mRNA and for whatever you want to manufacture. It's really just what they've did is crazy. And if you look at the people behind it, it's completely intelligence, CIA, Incutel, Binex, you name it. These are all the major big deep state intelligence players with the DoD, National Security Council, for COVID-19 response policies, WHO completely on board. This is a massive scam, and people have got really rich during the pandemic, so absolutely. Yeah, they need to be held accountable, that's for sure.
I wanted to ask you quickly about the mRNA platform thing is just so, I'm glad people are becoming more of a conversation point. The Moderna page that showed that's actually they've removed it now, and even their video outlining their process has been censored by YouTube. I don't even know how to make sense of that, but it's like that clearly something's not making sense there. But you mentioned 2019 and something that was circulating beforehand. So what's your opinion on what that would be if we're in the midst of at least questioning the existence of a virus? Like, so what would that be essentially if we have evidence of something circulating? Like, was that the weapon put out ahead of time? Like, I want your perspective. Go ahead.
Dude, I just quickly in December, right after late November, early December, right after Thanksgiving in 2019, we got leveled with what they told us a few months later would be called SARS-CoV-2. At the time, they tried to tell my kid it was the mystery vaping illness, but he was 8, so that didn't really work. I didn't have I was still smoking regular cigarettes. E-cigarettes weren't in my house at all or anything like that. It just wasn't a part of the program. Mm-hmm. And there were a number of people in the Bay Area, South Bay, and then a little bit into the mountains where I was in California that all just got freaking just leveled with this thing. And I mean, I haven't been flu sick like that ever in my life. I haven't really been sick since. I also haven't gone into a doctor. But
look, I'm going to tell you something, Sid, right? I think it was in August 2019. I was in Indonesia. I was in Bali, my wife, and we went to venture. We had a friend of ours. He has it's kind of a small hotel. It's not really a hotel. It's like a host, kind of a motel, more on the island, on the Gillies Islands. And he's from South Africa. My wife is from South Africa. And so we decided to spend 10 days and kind of island hopping. It's quite a nice place. So, and before I got onto the islands, our friends told us, like, say, look, guys, be careful there because there's a virus going around. Everybody's sick, in the hotel, everybody's sick. So I said, what do you mean? I said, we don't know. There's something on the islands and it's pretty bad. Anyway, I didn't pay too much attention and we left and we went there. And I got there. Literally in 24 hours, I was someone very kind of healthy, great. And it really went really bad. I barely saw any of these 10 days. I spent pretty much my time in bed and it took me months to recover. Yeah. When I got to see the doctors on the island, he told me something very interesting. First of all, he gave me ivermectin, which I found it really was that a parasite? It's not a virus, a parasite. He didn't give me antibiotics. Give me ivermectin. So I knew there was a parasite. It's not a virus, first of all. But what I was very interesting about is his comments. And he said, look, this scam now just suddenly out of the blue. And there's absolutely no explanations. We've done sampling, we've looked into it, and we just can't figure out what this thing is. And I say, it's a virus. He said, no. It's not a virus. The entire island was sick. I mean, people were basically transported from the island back onto the mainland to Denpasar in Bali. So I can tell you this was a serious public health issue there. but not because of a virus. So to answer your question to both of you is that my idea and my view on that is that it's indeed a virus-like particles, but it was not, obviously transmitted through pangolins or a third party or whatever. I think this was spread across different key spots in the world, especially spots where people from different nations goes on holiday and they can bring that back to them, because there is a transmission aspect to this virus-like particle. But this is, again, not a biological, it is biosynthetic. Okay?
I understand that it would be speculative to answer this. However, to what degree do you think the I guess race or nationality targeting type bioweapon has to play in this? Because we have seen reports, little bits of evidence here and there that at least some of the labs in Ukraine were working on targeting two specific races of people, or not, geographic origins, that sort of thing. And if your bioweapon is being set off in holiday destinations that are frequented by people from all over the world, and you're looking for as broad of reactions with which to test your new mRNA technology, would it not then make sense to have if possible, at your disposal, a variety of, I don't know, phenotype is the wrong word, but to relate it to plants, like the different strains, I guess, of virus-like entity, whatever it is, to see how your new jabby jabs work, if nothing else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the realm of biology, synthetic biology has evolved, especially the last 10 years. When you start to read the reports and the government's, fundings of synthetic biology, you can realize the progress that has been made. So as far as engineering a VLP, and it's not only VLP, there's other form of synthetic organism that can be used, like parasites and so on. So there's many ways to select whether it's an ethnic background, or maybe a population that is more at risk. Now, my personal view on that is that I'm not quite sure about the ethnic background. I think really, when I look at the data, I can see that this is really mainly the people that were poor, which means they have a bad food hygiene, people that actually had not a good healthy life, or people that have comorbidity that suffered from this VLP or whatever that is. But what's very, very interesting here is that it was targeted at people that whether the immune system was compromised or that had a very poor health hygiene, low kind of immune system, so and that is as far as what they call the virus, and then of course the real price of the COVID-19 is its injections. This is what it was all about. They developed a pandemic so that they could actually inject people. It's not the other way around.
Go ahead. I just want, if you're done, I wanted to ask you about this post. I've been interested in this since almost before COVID-19, like right in the beginning of this conversation, the illusion therein. This is from February 2011. Dang it. Just, you can see the date right there, if I can get it to highlight. So the point is that this is, way before. And this is a discussion of Charles Lieber, who was one of the guys that was kind of swept up before COVID really became the discussion that it is in regard to working. And he's the leading expert in the world on virus-sized transistors. And they were successfully making biocompatible transistors the size of viruses all the way back then. And his argument was when this is released into the world, it's basically you can't discern between the two things. It acts just like a virus. Again, assuming that's something that's real, and we're talking about that, and the overlap, and even the virus-like particle, the word being used because that's the context which people understand it. Just putting it for those that the rightly disputing whether or not this is something that's real. I'm very open to that conversation, but I wanted your thoughts on what this is if you think this is the same kind of a thing, and then flesh out the virus-like particle part of this for me. And like, so the argument, it sounds like you're saying, is it was deployed, and that's essentially what then that's being treated with the injection, or the other way around. Or explain that for me, because this is fascinating. And I do think there's an edge to this story that people need to be open to, that's more than just either a virus or a bioweapon. Like, I think this much bigger, in my opinion.
Yes, I think really I came to this conclusion simply because the bioweapon experts come to the same conclusion. And not because they, with regard to SARS-CoV-2, but in general, those Michael Callahan or David France, of the world, these are top experts of the United States. Michael Callahan was CIA, of course. But what we're looking at is people that are telling you in their own literatures, if you read their book, you'll understand that they've looked into after the post Cold War era, where they started to move into obviously Eastern Europe, and starting to look into these biological laboratories and these biowarfare laboratories, and trying to obviously remove these dangerous pathogens, and trying to understand what the Russians has as a biological weapon capacity. And they've identified they have actually, it's well listed, a series of about 10 pathogens that are extremely dangerous to humans. And really, when you look at the concept, it was really about loading up some ballistic missile with this kind of pathogens and sending across the ocean. Really, this is not really that complex. But the conclusions, after reviewing all the plans with regards to the developments of biowarfare program, is that they were very unlikely to be successful, from a warfare point of view. There was just too many unknown, too many risky aspects of it. It's not easy to obviously be operationally in a terrain that has received, these kind of pathogens as well. So there's a huge countermeasure, obviously operation and manufacturing that needs to be associated to this program. It's quite complex, and they felt that it was not that efficient after all. So they didn't come with a conclusion that this is how the battle is going to be fought in the 21st century at all. But what they came up with as a conclusion is very interesting. And by the words of David France, he clearly says in his latest book, he said that biological hoax, it is the most powerful, basically, bioweapon in the world, because it has the tendency to attract a lot of media attention, word for words. Now, that tells you everything. These people's minds, they didn't need a bioweapon. There's no need for a bioweapon. All you need is just something that creates symptoms, that create panic and fear amongst the population. Okay. That's what it is. You don't need to basically spread that around the world to try to get as many as people infected by this VLP. All you need is few people with that and the symptoms, and then having enough alleged people dying from this VLP or for this alleged virus. And if you look at the numbers, when the public health emergency was announced in the United States, there was about 40, 60 people infected apparently, and 3 people have died from it. That's not a global pandemic. That's not a public health of international concerns. I mean, if you really want to see how many people are dying from pulmonary disease, you just got to go to Lombardia, a region in Italy where the air quality is terrible, and you have about 25,000 people a year that dies from this kind of illness. So you don't need to go to China to find this kind of illness and death. So it's really, really fabricated. And from the biofair point of view, as I say, I believe that biological hoax was the most powerful decision. And that is the reason why everyone has found documents and all this kind of 201 meeting agenda. Do you really think the Department of Defense will have left all this kind of evidence for you to find? No, they will have never left it there. They left it there for you to read it because they already wanted to take you on the path of the virus, or the Chinese virus, or the lab leak virus. And that's what counterintelligence people do. They don't let you choose path. What they do is they bring 2 options: the lab leak, or the pangolin. You choose, but it's got to be a virus. So
remember those
you got to look the other way. you'll probably be closer to the truth. So my theory is really this is a biological hoax as far as the virus concerned, and as far as making the bioweapon is the shot. And I believe, I can't prove it yet, but clearly the VLP was definitely aerosolized, and probably spread in a couple of key areas in the world, making sure it brought back sick people to the countries. That's it.
Steve, I know you got a point. Can I jump in really quickly? this is so interesting to me. So this overlap, I think you really connected some dots here with this theory in regard to, this is interesting. So the potential here now seems, leaning into the theory here, which is seeming to make a lot of sense, that the virus nanoparticle direction had been engineered by people like Lieber, by a lot of other people connected to the same agenda, like Lieber and Harvard and even Epstein. There's weird overlaps to a lot of stuff happening here. But the point being that they potentially could have worked on that. And that was the deployment of something. That's why he was kind of shuttled away, and we don't even know what's going on with him at this point. And it overlaps interesting with me to what I still think happened in Botswana, rather South Africa, where we had the diplomats with diplomatic immunity that we've never identified, and that's supposedly where Omicron started. So what was that? Was that another effort to change what was happening, or to, I'm just theorizing here, but this is very interesting because look, again, I showed the article. Virus size transistors in 2011 were a reality. So it's not that far-fetched to think this could have been exactly like, even for those out there that are unwilling to challenge the virus theory kind of mindset, which we should be questioning everything. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. It's certainly possible that they also could have just put this out in order to initiate something, and the bioweapon is still the injection, and viruses do exist. For those out there questioning all of this. But either way, what you're saying makes more sense to me than anything right now, Freddie. And this is fascinating to me. I really do think this is primary in my mind right now.
Yeah, it's very two things important that I'll probably conclude with, Ryan and Steve, is that first question to anyone that comes and going to tell you, well, it's impossible, how these people die. Someone need to explain to me where the common cold has disappeared for 2.5 years. They need to explain that to me, from an epidemiologic point of view, from a biological point of view. What are they going to tell me? They're going to tell me that this virus from China came and replaced the cold because the PCR test has the magic ability to differentiate from influenza particles and the SARS-CoV-2 particles. We have a level of nonsense that is absolutely unbelievable. And today, what I can tell you is that what we had a RT-PCR, a case demic. They needed cases. That's it. That's the RT-PCR job. Period. It's very been proven. All the evidence are there. We know what Drosten has done. The documents are absolutely just speaking for themselves. So there's no way that will stand in court 100%. Now the second part of it is that now that the cold did not disappear. So literally people had a normal cold, and that's what really happened, and it ended up being called COVID-19. But really, what I'm really suggesting to people is really to looking at the big picture. The big picture is that what was the intent? What was the intent of these countermeasures, these vaccines? Because when you vaccinate someone with a new technology, which exists because it's actually described by Pfizer and Moderna. It's on their documents saying that we are losing liposome. Now, liposome, if you look into the ISO literatures, the international standard, you're going to understand that liposome is nothing else than nanotechnology. So why nobody's talking, even in the Congress or even in the House of Representatives, using the word nanotechnology? It's like almost people are scared and being called conspiracy theorists by using the word nanotechnology, when the liposome is a bloody nanotechnology. So you got to call, for what it is, And so that's the beginning of the transformation. As far as the movement moving forward, we really need people to start to use the term biosynthetic weapon. We need people to start to use the term nanotechnology and feeling comfortable that doesn't make them crackpots. This is really something that is out there, that exists, that is in the scientific literatures, and we need to call it out. And we understand how this was put out. We understand, I've wrote recently about NATO's involvement in the COVID-19 response in Europe. Who would have known that NATO has played a massive role in the COVID-19 response in Europe? Why? a political defense apparatus like NATO would want to get involved with a response to a pandemic. Right, so that's a great article you can go and read. So second part is coming out soon. But what I can tell you, it's definitely an intelligence work with the Department of Defense and the public partnership with, all these Bill Gates of the world and many academics, many institutes of the world that has basically plotted against us, and we need to bring these people to justice.
Absolutely, man. Well said. Steve, did you have another point you wanted to bring before you left?
Well, shit. No, let's have another round of this though. By all means, let's do this again. I did the earlier thing that I had in my head was what we've been given, and one of the primary functions of media during all of this is a choose your own adventure book. Do you remember those when you were a kid, Freddie? I don't know if you had those when you were growing up or not. So you would get a book, and you would get to pick what the character was going to do, and it would give you a set of options, and then you would go to a certain page, and then you would have another set of options after a task or a little part of the adventure, and you were under the impression that you were guiding the character through all of this, and you were making the decisions for the character. But in reality, all of the decisions had been predetermined. All of the scenarios had already been gamed out, and there was, a predetermined course of action for each and every conceivable decision to be made throughout the actual adventure. And that's what our media narrative is. You only get a selective set of choices. None of them have anything to do with actual reality. And it's a nice little work of fiction that you can feel like you're participating in. Right. And maybe you even have you maybe even be a stakeholder in the outcome of your particular character.
I love it.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
It reminds me out of terrible childhood. I didn't walk. I was a bit of suffering from autism, when I was young, until 5.5. Didn't walk, didn't talk, so it's probably I missed that chapter, but that's fascinating for sure. Very interesting.
Yeah, I love the analogy just because it's obviously like, I wasn't sure if that's what you were going to go. First thing that popped in my head is that's the illusion, like the two-party paradigm. We're obviously same mindset. I loved those books. I grew up on those books, and you basically turn to the page and it's like, if you want him to go in the cave, turn to page 47. If you want him to go around the corner, turn to page 5, and then you turn to those pages and the story continues. And it's like, in Steve's point, you even at a kid, you go, okay, let me do both. And then you realize, it all goes the same way.
Temptation.
It's the child steering wheel in the car, the same analogy, right? You think you're in control and you're really not. I love it.
Exactly. Very good analogy. Absolutely. That's exactly what we are. But look, I've only scratched the surface, obviously, for the sake of time. But obviously, there's far more, and we can go much more into details. As far as the chapters we had the chance to see with Operation Warp Speed in the United States. We actually been able to track down this effort, and how. The manufacturing of this so-called vaccine, how was that handled by Europe? What was the mechanism? Who was in charge of that? How did it happen? And I've literally break it down quite nicely and look at really identifying who's in charge, the people behind the politics, behind the policies behind, and looking really at the big picture. And Operation Warp Speed has been now recreated in Europe under an agency. It's called HERA, So I'll talk about it. I'm not going to tell you everything now, but I'll talk all about it in between NATO, HERA, and recreating a complete mRNA manufacturing capacity for Europe. So these guys, they're not done with us as far as jab concerned. Yeah. We've got to stay alert, that's for sure.
Here.
Well, Freddie, please do come back. Let everybody know where they can find you, where they can find your work, how your work can be supported, all that kind of good stuff.
Sure. Well, I pretty much work for you, so I'm just a passionate person. I've got other things and other things to do, but I mainly write on the 21st century with Patrick Henningsen. So this is where most of my archive. If you can go at Freddie Ponton, archive 21st century wire on Google, you'll find all my articles there. And then on Twitter, you can always pop me a message at LFC News Media. I'm always open, as long as it makes sense. And that's it, really. It's what I do at the moment. I'm trying to write a little bit more than I used to, because I really enjoy writing. So eventually, hopefully, there'll be a book project. I'll talk more about that later.
Heck yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, man. Appreciate it. I appreciate your time. I do.
All right, no problem. Thank you so much for having me, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's an honor to talk to you today, brother. We got to connect again for sure. Have a good one.
Anytime. Just ring the bell. Cheers, buddy.
Well, that was a great conversation, man. I really enjoyed that. I did.
Heck yeah.
I think the interesting overlap to all of this, it's you can just tell from him, at least my impression. I've never spoken before. He's a very honest person, and he really he's able to have the discussion of something that may be the possibility without attacking the other